Go ahead and wait out there.
Whoa! Yeah, right there.
My cousin lives up front, and I haven't heard from him in 2 days. Well, I'm looking through his front window, and it looks like there's blood on the bed.
Officers entered this home thinking it was a routine welfare check.
This is 911.
Yeah, I need the police.
What's going on there?
My cousin lives up front, and I haven't heard from him in 2 days. Well, I'm looking through his front window, and it looks like there's blood on the bed.
Upon receiving this request for a welfare check on 27-year-old
a 4 a.m. text message, a hidden audio recording, a murder no one saw coming unraveled by the smallest details. In this video, we take you deep into the investigation of Byron Edwards' death, where every word, every drop of blood, every glance might be the key to unlocking the entire tragedy. Get ready, because the truth isn't just painful, it's chilling to the bone. ADAG. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss another gripping case and to receive exclusive benefits from us.
Evansville, Indiana. Late November afternoon, and the sky hung low with swollen gray clouds like a drenched blanket refusing to let go. The cold wind slid between the narrow streets, whispering through door cracks, curling under porches cloaked in moss. Reed Street, a quiet residential neighborhood where on any normal day, the soft chime of wind bells could be heard from far down the block, felt different today. At apartment 204B, something was off. A single window, half open, revealed torn curtains flapping like desperate arms reaching for help. The light inside flickered erratically, like a failing heartbeat gasping in silence. On the power lines overhead, a handful of crows perched, calling out in hoarse, broken cries like a warning that something dark had happened or was about to. An older man who lived a few doors down stopped his car and stared at that flickering window. He hadn't seen Byron, the man who lived there, in 3 days. No music playing. No footsteps crossing the hallway. No familiar greetings in the morning. Just silence. Driven by a gnawing sense of dread, he approached the building and peered through the torn curtain. That's when it hit him a wave of metallic stench slammed into his face. It was unmistakable, the smell of blood. Inside, the dim outline of a bed came into view, and on it, a dark crimson streak ran from the sheets down to the floor dread, thickened and cruel, like a wound carved into time itself. He froze. Just for a few seconds. But it was enough. He knew something terrible had happened behind that wall. Heart pounding, hands trembling, he pulled out his phone and dialed 911, his voice splintering with panic and disbelief. Within minutes, the once peaceful Reed Street would become something else entirely. A nightmare was about to crawl out from behind that flickering window and spill into the light. And from that moment on, everything changed.
The phone rang, slicing through the silence like a blade. A call to 911 urgent, trembling, fragmented. It was Byron's cousin. He hadn't heard from him in 3 days. No calls, no texts, no sign of life. Standing outside apartment 204B, he watched the dim, flickering light behind the tattered curtain with growing dread. Police were dispatched immediately. A patrol car pulled up quietly outside the complex. 2 officers stepped out, faces taut, hands close to their weapons. They didn't know what they were about to find, but instinct told them this wouldn't be just another welfare check. The front door was locked. No answer when they knocked. One officer stepped back and rammed his shoulder into the door. The sharp crack of splintering wood echoed through the hallway like a scream. Then came the smell, thick, metallic, and unmistakable. Blood. Inside was a scene that would haunt them forever. Byron lay face down on the living room floor, one arm outstretched, the other twisted beneath him. His throat had been slashed, blood soaking deep into the carpet. In the dim lighting, the room looked like a battlefield. Furniture was overturned, items scattered, as if a brutal struggle had taken place. Smears of blood trailed from the bedroom out into the narrow hall. Neither officer spoke. The air felt heavy, pressed down by death. One of them knelt beside the body and froze when he saw something clenched in Byron's hand. A crumpled piece of paper. Carefully, he pried it free. Byron's fingers were still stiff, locked around it like it was the last thing that mattered. When the officer unfolded the note, the ink was smudged, but the message remained clear. Why didn't you stop it? No one knew who the message was meant for. Was it a cry of desperation? A plea? A final accusation? Whatever it was, it shifted the weight in the room, made it colder, heavier. The officer stood up, his voice low as he radioed in. "We've got a DOA, crime scene. Send forensics and homicide now." Far-off sirens began to wail. For the residents of Reed Street, this night would never be ordinary again. Apartment 204B had become a wound fresh, deep, and bleeding. And it was just the beginning. When the forensic team arrived, the red and blue lights from the patrol cars splashed across the front of apartment 204B, casting eerie shadows over the building's facade. Inside, everything remained untouched. Byron's body still lay motionless, the floor soaked with blood, and a chill clung to the air like a warning unspoken. But now, the evidence began to speak. As investigators combed through the apartment, one officer opened a small cabinet near the floor and froze. Inside was a semi-automatic handgun, its handle stained with dried blood. It hadn't been fired, but its presence was chilling. In the bathroom, a pair of yellow rubber gloves lay discarded beneath the sink clean on the outside, but still slightly damp. Nearby sat a bottle of industrial-strength cleaning spray, the kind used by professionals to scrub out the worst. 3 items, 3 pieces of a puzzle. Together, they painted a disturbing portrait. This wasn't an impulsive crime. It was planned, cold, calculated, and deliberate. The apartment grew heavier with implication. Every drawer, every speck of dust seemed to whisper part of a larger, more terrifying story. The detectives didn't speak much, but each of them knew what the evidence was saying. Whoever had done this hadn't panicked. They'd come prepared. While crime scene techs gathered physical evidence, another team reviewed surveillance footage from nearby buildings. It didn't take long before they found something that made them all stop cold. A grainy video clip from a security camera across the street, time-stamped one, 3 a.m., showed a shadowy figure standing directly in front of Byron's apartment. The image was dark, distorted by low light, but clear enough to reveal a man standing completely still, facing the door. He didn't knock, he didn't move, he didn't use his phone. He just stood there rigid, arms at his sides, like a ghost, waiting at the threshold. For 6 minutes he remained frozen. Then, without warning, he turned and disappeared into the darkness. The investigators exchanged uneasy glances. Who stands outside a murder victim's door in the middle of the night, unmoving, watching? Why didn't he enter? Or had he already been inside and returned? And most of all, who was he? The footage was immediately extracted and sent to the full investigation team. No one could shake the feeling that this was no random act. This was methodical. There wasn't just a murder here. There was a presence of phantom in the night, carefully planning his move, executing it in silence, and vanishing without a trace. As the last of the flashing lights faded from Reed Street and the forensic team packed up their gear, a strange stillness fell over apartment 204B's, the kind of silence that seemed to beg for truth. In the interrogation room, Ashley, Byron's older sister, sat across from the lead investigator. Her eyes were tired, searching. She tried to appear composed, but something inside her had already begun to crack. Ashley started with what she believed to be the truth. Byron didn't have enemies. He was private, kind, always joking a man who minded his own business. But that belief began to shake when she mentioned a name, Inns. She didn't know the woman personally, but had overheard neighbors say they'd seen someone matching that name lingering near Byron's apartment just days before his death. Byron had never once mentioned her. Pressed for more details, Ashley hesitated, then revealed something she'd kept buried. Roughly 2 weeks before the murder, she had seen Byron in a heated argument with a man she didn't recognize. It happened late one evening, near the front gate. The exchange was short but intense. Byron had looked visibly shaken afterward. He wasn't the same after that night. When she asked him about it, he brushed it off with a quick, "It's nothing, just a small thing," and change the subject, but Ashley knew better. In the days that followed, Byron changed. He replaced the locks, stopped going out, and stayed up at night. He never explained why. He just shut down emotionally and physically like a man, expecting something dark to come knocking. Now, with Byron gone, those small hidden moments took on terrifying new meaning. The detective leaned back, processing her words. Byron wasn't just a man who'd been randomly murdered. He was someone who saw the threat coming, tried to outrun it, tried to protect others by staying silent, paid the price. Ashley's account shifted the case entirely. Now, there were two names at the center: Inns, the mysterious woman from the shadows, and the unknown man Byron had argued with. Who were they? What did they want from Byron? And why was he so determined to keep it to himself? Her testimony painted Byron not as a victim of chance, but as someone who had lived his final days under a veil of dread, knowing something, fearing something, and hiding it until it was too late. Some truths are too heavy to speak while someone is alive, but after death, those same truths rise like smoke, unavoidable, undeniable. The question now was no longer just who killed Byron Edwards, but why he didn't tell anyone what was coming. The interrogation room was cold, sterile by the kind of fluorescent light that made everything look harsher than it was. Inns sat down slowly, the metal chair creaking beneath her. She wore a thin coat, her eyes wary and defensive, but underneath, something was cracking. The detectives began gently, easing into the conversation. Inns claimed she hadn't seen Byron in weeks. They were nothing more than acquaintances. She said nothing serious, nothing close. But they didn't need her to say much. They had her phone records. According to GPS data, Inns's phone had pinged near Byron's apartment on the night of his murder, from around midnight until nearly 2 a.m. When detectives presented the evidence, her expression faltered. She went quiet. Then the tears came sudden and sharp. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. "I'm sorry," she choked out. "I was there, but I didn't go inside. I was just passing by." She insisted she knew nothing about the murder. But when asked why she lied, her demeanor flipped like a switch. She slammed the table, her voice rising in frustration, insisting she was being framed, that someone was trying to pin this on her. Every answer she gave contradicted the last. At one point, she claimed she was at a friend's house. Later, she said she was riding the bus. When asked to name the bus stop or the route, she drew blanks. The more she spoke, the more tangled her story became. Investigators didn't push. They didn't have to. Her lies were unraveling on their own. Finally, one detective pulled out her phone, the one they'd confiscated earlier. In the photo gallery, they found a single image that changed everything. A photo of Byron's bed, taken from inside his apartment. The bed was unmade, sheets rumpled. There was no blood, yet meaning the picture had been taken before the murder. It was undeniable. This was the crime scene before the crime. When Inns saw the photo, she froze. "Why do you have this picture?" the detective asked, voice low and razor sharp. She said nothing. Her wide eyes scanned the room, as if hoping the truth would dissolve in silence. It didn't. Now, they knew Inns had been inside Byron's apartment that night. Whether she was the killer or not, she was no longer just a witness. She was part of it. For the first time, she stopped crying. No more outbursts, no more shifting blame. She just sat there, eyes red, staring past the walls. Her excuses had run dry. The evidence spoke louder. The truth didn't need shouting, it just needed time. And tonight, her tears had finally dragged it into the light. Trong lúc cuộc điều tra tưởng chừng đi vào ngõ cụt thì một cái tên mới xuất hiện, Emily. Cô là bạn gái cũ của Byron, người mà nạn nhân đã nhắn tin liên tục vào đêm định mệnh. Sir Swat Hearing của Emily nụ một mảnh ghép chưa từng được nhắc đến, nhưng có thể thay đổi toàn bộ hướng điều tra. Cô bước vào phòng thẩm vấn với vẻ ngập ngừng, nét mặt pha lẫn buồn và hoài nghi. Giọng nói nhỏ nhẹ nhưng dứt khoát, Emily xác nhận rằng vào đêm hôm đó, cô đã đến nhà Byron. "Chúng tôi chỉ nói chuyện thôi, không nói. Uống vài ly, hút thuốc, anh ấy luôn như thế mỗi khi thấy tâm trạng tệ." Cô kể rằng Byron có vẻ bồn chồn, ánh mắt không tập trung như thường lệ. Anh nói không rõ điều gì, chỉ lầm bầm rằng có một người nào đó đang theo đuổi anh. Rồi cô dừng lại, thay vô thức sẽ chart map out. Byron đã rút một khẩu súng từ trong túi áo khoác. Cô nói, không phải để đùa tôi, chỉ là anh ấy bảo tôi nên biết nếu có chuyện gì xảy ra. Khẩu súng đó chính là khẩu được tìm thấy sau này tại hiện trường. Lời kể của Emily Zack thực thêm một phần. Byron đã cảm nhận được hiểm nguy và chuẩn bị tinh thần cho điều tồi tệ. Nhưng điều khiến điều tra viên rùng mình là đến sau đó. Emily cho biết, khi cô rời khỏi nhà Byron khoảng gần 1 giờ sáng, cô vừa bước xuống bậc thềm thì nghe thấy tiếng đập cửa rất mạnh, cùng một giọng nói gần qua cửa sổ. Mỹ không thể tròn mãi được, giọng nói ấy rít lên. Cô dừng lại vài giây, định quay lại hỏi Byron có ổn không, nhưng anh không trả lời. Cô hoang sợ và bối đi, nghĩ rằng có lẽ là bạn bè xảy xin hoặc AI đồ đùa đại. Cô không biết rằng chính khoảnh khắc bỏ đi ấy là lúc mọi thứ bắt đầu đổ máu. Khi rời phòng thẩm vấn, Emily không còn là một nhân chứng bình thường. Cô là người cuối cùng nhìn thấy Byron còn sống, là nhân chứng duy nhất nghe thấy âm thanh báo hiệu một cơn bão sắp ập đến, và là người chứng thực rằng Byron đã dự cảm được kết cục của chính mình nhưng không thể thoát khỏi nó. Một mảnh ghép mới đã hiện hình, và bức tranh mau bắt đầu sáng rõ hơn bao giờ hết. From Emily's testimony, detectives began tracing a name that had until then remained buried in the shadows of the investigation, Elijah Johnson. He hadn't come up in the early stages of the case, but now, the pieces were starting to fall into place with chilling precision. Elijah was the older brother of the girl who lived next door to Byron. They shared a wall, a hallway, and a thin slice of silence. But Byron rarely used the front entrance if Elijah was outside. He'd take the side exit, always watching, always avoiding. That wasn't coincidence. When detectives pulled his file, one detail jumped out immediately. Elijah had a prior arrest for violence against women. His criminal history wasn't long, but it was violent, unsettling. More disturbing still, in the months leading up to the murder, Byron had made several calls to police, reporting someone watching him near his apartment late at night. Patrols had been dispatched, but no one was ever caught. There were no cameras in the right places, and Byron could never name the man. But one forgotten report contained something critical. Byron had described the stalker as tall, thin, light-skinned, wearing a brown jacket. It was a perfect match for Elijah Johnson. When investigators lined up the fact's proximity, criminal past, physical description, and now Emily's account, it was undeniable. Elijah needed to be brought in immediately. As it turned out, he was already in custody at Vanderburgh County Jail, held on an unrelated assault charge, another violent outburst, another woman hurt. But his detainment only made detectives more certain. This wasn't a man capable of moving on quietly. This was someone with a pattern. More than once, Byron had reported being stalked, and though there hadn't been enough evidence to act back then, those old whispers now screamed through the case file. In that moment, everything began to align. What had once seemed like disconnected events began to fuse together. The path to Byron's killer was narrowing, and it was pointing straight at Elijah Johnson. Now, the door to truth was open. What lay behind either confession or a carefully crafted lie was yet to be seen. But one thing was certain: the hunt for answers had just turned personal. The interrogation room had lost all sense of neutrality. The air inside was thick, like it had stopped moving, weighted by the silence that always comes before something breaks. Elijah Johnson was brought in, hands loosely cuffed, eyes scanning the walls as if he were studying every crack in the paint. He said nothing. No greeting, no glance at the detectives. Only a low, guttural chuckle that slipped from his throat sharp. Unsettling. At first, Elijah refused to answer any questions. He sat slouched in his chair, fingers interlaced, murmuring to himself in fragments no one could decipher. His behavior was erratic. He would suddenly burst into laughter, only to fall silent again like the joke had vanished before he could finish it. His emotions flickered with no rhythm, like a broken clock stuck between hours. The detectives didn't rush. They let him sit with his silence, let him feel the walls close in while the weight of the evidence pressed heavier with each second. And then, cornered by undeniable facts, GPS, data, surveillance footage, Emily's testimony. Elijah finally spoke, but not to confess. Instead, he pivoted. He claimed Byron attacked him first. His voice trembled, but he kept a defensive posture. He said he had only gone to Byron's apartment to talk, that things escalated, and Byron suddenly lost it. Elijah insisted he had no choice but to protect himself. When asked why he never called the police, he let out a sarcastic laugh and said nothing. Then came the evidence of the rubber gloves and industrial cleaning spray clear signs that someone had tried to cover up a crime scene. Elijah looked directly at the lead detective and offered what sounded like a rehearsed excuse. "I used to work for a cleaning company. I always carry that kind of stuff in my bag." Technically plausible, but no one in the room believed it. The overhead fluorescent light flickered. Elijah lowered his head, tapping his fingers against the metal table in a strange rhythm, as if counting down the seconds until his story collapsed. The truth was circling close now, but Elijah tried to hold on to control by wrapping himself in contradictions and chaos. Still, with every smirk, every recycled excuse, every twisted word, he wasn't pushing the truth away, he was digging his own grave. And the name written on that indictment? It was already his. The clock on the wall struck 8:00 p.m. when the psychological standoff between detectives and Elijah reached its breaking point. For over an hour, he had talked in circles, moments of silence, followed by bursts of blame, excuses, shifting responsibility onto everything and everyone but himself. But the truth could no longer be buried. The weight of the evidence bore down on him like a mountain. Laid out before him on the table was a thick file. On top, the official forensic report. Inside were graphic images, wound diagrams, and the coroner's expert conclusion. Byron had been stabbed 20 times, many of the wounds from behind, cutting deep into his back and shoulders. There were no signs of defensive wounds indicating Byron was caught off guard, cornered, and helpless. Elijah went quiet, sweat beaded on his forehead. He blinked rapidly, trying to keep his composure, but his hands began to tremble. Then he bowed his head and exhaled a broken confession. "I killed him, but it was self-defense." No one in the room moved. The detectives let him speak, let the broken pieces of his narrative tumble into the open. He claimed he went to Byron's apartment to clear the air. That Byron led him to the bedroom, tensions rose, and then, according to Elijah, Byron snapped and reached for something under the bed. Fearing for his life, Elijah said he pulled a folding knife from his pocket and reacted. He described his movements like they were instinct, a blur of survival, but the investigators remained stone-faced. They knew with 20 stab wounds, most from the back, this wasn't survival. It was execution. Eventually, Elijah admitted more. He wore rubber gloves before entering and disposed of them afterward. When asked about the knife, he claimed it was a habit, something he always carried. Not to kill anyone, just part of who he was. But each excuse rang hollow. The gloves, the spray bottle, the calculated attack, the post-crime cleanup, all of it painted a picture far removed from panic. This was premeditation. This was precision. The room grew quiet. There were no more raised voices, no more pushing for answers, just the slow, deliberate sound of pens marking the official record. The truth had been spoken, but not on Elijah's terms. This case had turned a page. Elijah Johnson was no longer a suspect. He was a murderer. Around 4:00 a.m., in that fragile space between night silence and the first breath of dawning, final message was sent from Byron's phone. Just one line, simple and devastating. "If I don't make it, I love you." It was sent to Emily. No one could say for sure what Byron was thinking in that moment. Had he heard something, felt something? Or was it simply a desperate premonition, the kind only those close to death seemed to sense? To investigators, it was a farewell soaked in dread, a last signal from someone who knew his time was running out. Meanwhile, forensic analysts were finalizing the GPS data pulled from the phones of Enns and Elijah. Both devices had pinged near Byron's apartment between 12:00 a.m. and 2:00 a.m., the window in which the murder occurred. But when the data was broken down, movement patterns, signal strength, and duration of presence became clear. Only Elijah remained inside the apartment longer than expected, while Inns left after briefly hovering near the premises. She was officially cleared as a suspect. Elijah, on the other hand, was now buried under the weight of irrefutable proof, but the final blow didn't come from testimony. It came from a hidden audio file, buried deep in the Notes app on Byron's Phonia recording that seemed to be captured in a moment of panic, as if Byron knew something was about to go horribly wrong. The audio lasted just under 2 minutes. In it, the sounds of a confrontation could be heard sharp, raw, real. A deep male voice, tight with anger, repeated, "I warned you. You didn't listen." Then Byron's voice, tired but firm, "I'm not afraid of you." Then chaos. Furniture crashing, struggled breaths, a sharp cry of pain cut off mid-sentence. And finally, silence. That recording wasn't just evidence. It was Byron's final account, a fragmented, desperate retelling preserved in sound. And it confirmed everything the case had been building toward. Elijah didn't act out of fear. He acted out of rage, control, and a long-burning grudge. The investigators listened to the full clip in silence. No one spoke. One officer sighed. Another paused the playback, his hand trembling slightly. There was nothing left to debate. Byron's last message had been sent not to plead, but to say goodbye. And his final words, trapped in a digital whisper, became the voice that brought the truth to light. As the sun rose over Evansville, every thread had been pulled into place. The case was no longer a mystery. It was a tragedy, told in static, silence, and a message left unanswered. On the final day of trial, the courtroom hung in a silence so heavy, it felt like no voice could pierce it. Every wooden bench was stiff and cold. Every gaze fixed itself on Elijah Johnson, as if waiting for something in apology, a bowed head, any trace of remorse, but he gave them nothing. Standing before the court, Elijah was sentenced to 29 years in prison for first-degree murder. The judge's voice was steady, unemotional, each word landing like a hammer on a coffin. 29 years. No parole, no leniency, one life buried behind bars, another erased by violence. Elijah didn't flinch. No reaction. No trembling hands. No lowered eyes. His face was stone, his eyes vacant, soulless. Not a single word of apology to Byron's family, not even a final statement to ease the weight of what he'd done. For him, it was simply the end of a chapter. Nothing more. But for Byron's mother, it was hell. When a video of her son smiling, alive, full of light played on the courtroom screen, something inside her broke. She rose slowly from her seat, stepped toward the front of the gallery, and then collapsed, sobbing as if her very soul had been torn open. The sound of her cry, raw, guttural, uncontainable, letched itself into the walls of that courtroom. The sound of a mother mourning not a natural death, but a life taken by cold, calculated brutality. A court officer rushed to her side, but nothing could ease that pain. No sentence, no verdict, no measure of justice could return what was lost. All eyes turned back to Elijah, still unmoved, still silent, as though the grieving mother, the shaking hands of friends, the still air of the courtroom, none of it existed, as though Byron had never been more than a name on a page, not a man who had laughed, breathed, and loved. When the officer placed a hand on Elijah's shoulder to lead him away, he gave the courtroom one last glance. Not to say goodbye, not to look at those he'd hurt, but as if to confirm that he'd left a scar no one would forget. The door closed behind him with a sound that echoed like a final judgment. The Byron Edwards case was over, but the tragedy was not. For Byron's family, every day from now on would be a repetition of memories that refused to fade. And for Elijah, prison bars may mark the end of the road, but for those left behind, the pain was just beginning. Winter arrived earlier than usual that year. Cold winds swept through the streets of Evansville, carrying with them a grief that had yet to settle. Byron's small home, once filled with laughter, weekend music, and the warm scent of home-cooked meals, now stood still, like a painting abandoned mid-stroke. Life had left the space, leaving behind a silence that could not be filled. Family and friends still stopped by, often standing on the porch as if waiting for Byron's voice to drift out from behind the door. Each brought with them a memorial story about Byron fixing a stranger's car in the rain, dropping everything to comfort a friend going through heartbreak, or sending a midnight message that simply read, "You good?" They all admitted Byron wasn't perfect, but he was quietly kind, the kind of kindness you didn't realize was rare until it was gone. After the trial, one of Byron's closest friends walked to an old oak tree near his house. In silence, he pulled out a pocket knife and carved 3 simple words into the bark. "Byron lives here." It wasn't a tombstone, it was a declaration that Byron still lived in memory, in the wind, in every breath of those who never got to say goodbye. At the small gatherings that followed, no one talked about court transcripts or Elijah's sentencing. They talked about Byron. They kept him alive by recalling the little things, the time he slipped into a mud puddle and just laughed it off, or the moment he carried an old woman's groceries without ever expecting a thank you. That's how they healed, not by forgetting, but by remembering exactly who Byron was and how he lived. But there were silences no story could fill. The couch where Byron used to sit remained untouched. His phone still buzzed each morning with the same alarm he never turned off. And in the bedroom where it all ended, the sunlight still poured through the window like nothing had changed yet everything had. Neighbors started posting small notes on their doors. "We see you." A quiet promise to the community that no one else would go unnoticed. No one else would disappear without being seen. The trial had ended, the sentence was given, but those left behind knew that justice never truly restores what has been lost. It only closes a chapter. The pain lingers like the first cold wind of winter. If Byron were still here, he probably wouldn't be angry, but he would want people to look out for each other more. So no one would ever have to send a 4 a.m. text because they were afraid it might be their last. And maybe that's what this case leaves behind. A reminder that sometimes all someone needs is to be heard before it's too late. The evening breeze swept through the old neighborhood, the same streets once shaken by Byron's murder. On the surface, everything seemed normal again. People shopping, kids riding bikes, neighbors exchanging familiar smiles. But beneath that calm was a lingering question. How could a crime like this happen and no one see it coming? Byron wasn't a stranger. He lived among them, a neighbor, a friend, a man who always offered help when someone needed it. But behind the laughter, the casual greetings, he may have been carrying signs of distress that no one truly noticed, or worse, signs no one thought were important enough to ask about. In his final months, Byron changed. He grew quieter, more cautious. He altered his routines, avoided eye contact, and started living like someone who was hiding. And no one asked why. We often assume that kind of behavior is just someone having a rough day. But the tragic truth is, many tragedies don't happen because they couldn't be prevented. They happen because no one was paying attention. The Byron Edwards case is not just the story of a murder. It's a wake-up call to an entire community. It's a reminder that responsibility doesn't only belong to police or the courts, it belongs to all of us. Because every small act of care, every simple question, every thoughtful glance can be the difference between life and death. If there's one lesson that must remain, it's this. Don't let tragedy unfold in silence. Pay attention to the quiet changes in your loved ones, your friends, your neighbors. Don't assume silence means everything's fine. Don't dismiss the forced smiles or the subtle distancing. And never think that could never happen here. Because the truth is, it can. And it did. The case is closed. The killer has been sentenced. But the lesson remains. And that lesson belongs to all of us. It's time to start listening more before it's too late.